As we get ready to start this morning, got a question for you. If I were to give you the option of getting into a fight with Mike Tyson or Taylor Swift, who would you pick? Some of y'all know where I'm going with this already. Mike Tyson, former undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, Mike Tyson, who the majority of his fights in his prime lasted about 2 minutes, against other highly trained boxers, by the way. Or Taylor Swift, a petite, small musician. Who would you pick? I'm telling you, like some of you already said, I would pick Mike Tyson. Here's why. Despite what you see here, this rugged physique, that fight would be over in about 5 seconds. In fact, the 10 count of me laying on the mat to be knocked out would last longer than the fight itself would last. Again, he was known for having one-punch knockouts of large, highly trained fighters. Okay? Taylor Swift, on the other hand, is known for writing songs that are brutally honest and just fraught with how she wants to get back at somebody who has hurt her. In fact, the common thought on Taylor Swift is you don't really have to know who she's dated in her past, because when it hasn't gone well, there's been a number one hit that's followed. And those songs endure, and they endure. In fact, here's one of them. This was one of her songs that came out several years ago, and it kind of goes like this. State the obvious, I didn't get my perfect fantasy. I realize you love yourself more than you could ever love me, so go and tell your friends that I'm obsessive and crazy. That's fine. You won't mind if I say, by the way, I hate that stupid old pickup truck you never let me drive. You're a redneck heartbreak who's really bad at lying. So watch me strike a match on all my wasted time. As far as I'm concerned, you're just another picture to burn. There's no time for tears. I'm just sitting here planning my revenge. There's nothing stopping me from going out with all your best friends. And if you come around saying sorry to me, my daddy's going to show you how sorry you'll be. Brutal. Brutal. But what Taylor Swift writes and sings, I think, strikes a chord with so many people because we feel similar at times. The human nature has a natural tendency and desire for revenge. Somebody's hurt us, we need to right the wrong. Okay, we want to get back at them. And I think if we really peel back all the layers to that onion, we kind of see like where this comes from. It's not just like, oh, well, I was hurt, so I'm going to hurt somebody else, or I'm going to hurt that person back. It actually stems from our like innate desire to make things right, to hand justice. Not so that they get theirs, but just so that everything is put back together. Here's the problem with this. As humans, we're not really capable or qualified to do this. We're really not. That's what we're going to kind of break down and talk about today, is that often when we try to go after somebody else, we don't get revenge. Revenge gets us. Jesus said it this way. He understood the idea that we have the right to get revenge on somebody, but we're not really capable of doing it. In other words, what Jesus said is there's the right to get revenge, but then there's also the way to get the right revenge. He said it like this in Matthew 5. You have heard that the law says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer them the other one also. Now, a lot of people have read this over the years and think, well, this just makes Christians a doormat, or a whipping post. Like, I can strike that person on the cheek and all they'll do is turn the other one to me. That's not exactly what Jesus is saying here. Like, there's a little method to what Jesus is saying here. He doesn't say just sit there and keep taking punches. No, in their custom, there was like a righteous way to strike somebody, and it was with the back of the right hand. Now, if you're standing directly across from me and I backhand you with my right hand, where am I hitting you? In the right cheek. That was like righteous striking, if there's such a thing. Like if you wronged me, I was allowed to do that. The two things I wasn't allowed to do was use the open palm of my right hand because that was considered aggression. It's the same as throwing a punch. Or use my left hand because my left hand's unclean. You use your left hand to do things. Sorry, I don't make the rules. Don't shoot the messenger. Don't backhand the messenger. Okay? Sorry for all you lefties out there. You were unclean, I guess, in this day and time, okay? Got a problem? Here's the Bible. You can take it up with Jesus, okay? So if you hit me on my right cheek with the back of your right hand, and I step forward and turn my left cheek to you, you're left with two options. You can hit me with the open palm of your right hand, coming the other direction, which was aggression and across the line, and could get you in trouble, or you've got to use your undignified left hand to do it. So kind of what Jesus is saying here is if somebody strikes you, it's not, hey, don't just sit there and let them keep hitting you. It's kind of like, that's the best you got? It's almost like Jesus is telling you, hey, give them the option to do something they shouldn't do or to walk away. That's what Jesus is saying here. And we think about this again, the idea of right revenge. Now, we've been in this series the past couple weeks on the life of David. And we're going through this series because David, although he was this king and this warrior and maybe the central figure of the Old Testament, David is so relatable for us because David was so similar to us in so many ways. David faced the same trials that we face. He was up against the same giants that we will face. And we're going to pick up the story today in 1 Samuel 24. If you got a Bible, you can go ahead and turn there. But 1 Samuel 24, just to kind of recap the story a little bit, we talked about how Israel wanted a king. They got Saul, who was this big, strapping, looked the part kind of king, looked like a warrior, like a leader kind of king. And then David is anointed because Saul quickly starts doing things wrong. David's picked to be the next king. He doesn't look the part. But yet he goes and kills Goliath, and Saul gets jealous. Ole talked about this last week, about the jealousy of Saul and how it just burned through him. And that actually leads Saul to try and kill David because he's sick of him already. And so David runs into the mountains and hides not because he's scared, but because rather than attacking Saul, he's hoping maybe if he goes and hides for a while, Saul's anger will die down a little bit. And Saul will kind of calm himself down and things will get put back to normal, but it doesn't quite work that way. So we pick it up in 1 Samuel 24. Saul's been out leading the armies against the Philistines pretty much nonstop this whole time. But it starts this way in chapter 24, verse 1. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the desert of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. Verse 3, he came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. We're going to pause for 1 second here because why not? Last week, Ole talked about foreskins. Today, we're talking about using the bathroom. Aren't you glad you came to church today? Okay? Aren't you glad you're here? Some of you may have got dragged here. You're like, I really don't want to go. This is church. Who cares? Foreskins in the bathroom. Like, what is this place? Where am I at? Verse 3, it says that David and his men were far in the back of the cave. And the men said, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. So, let's just give a little picture here, okay? David and his men are hiding in the back of this cave. Saul and his men are headed back home from a battle, and he has to stop to use the restroom. Now, dads, you know what this is like. You're on the way home, you're on the way somewhere, and you hear from the back seat, I need to go to the bathroom. You have two options. You turn around and say, hold it, or you find a place to pull over, okay? Typically, dads, we want to get there and set a record getting there, right? We want to be able to pull up and get out of the car and say, we made it in 5 hours and 13 minutes and 18 seconds. So, you don't like to stop for your kids to have to go. Usually, you wait until you have to go yourself, and then you pull over, okay? I don't know if that's where Saul's at here, but whatever the case, Saul has found himself some privacy, He's gotten off the road. He's gone into this cave to do his business. He has dropped his proverbial drawers, and he is about to take care of business. And here comes David from behind, creeping up. Saul literally caught with his pants down. And the guy's like, David, this is your chance, man. You can go kill Saul. I just got to say, whatever you think of Saul, this is a pretty crappy way to get killed. I'm sorry. I debated. I could not help myself. Here's something you got to know about me. I will never hit a point of maturity where this story will not be funny to me. I will giggle every time. I'm sorry. That's just who I am. Here's the thing, though. He's going about his business. They're like, David, here's your chance. You can go kill him. And here's what David does. It says, David crept up unannounced and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. David's perfectly justified in doing what needs to be done here. Because if this were the other way around, Saul would have done this to him. Saul would not have hesitated. In fact, it would have been perfect. Because he's like, oh man, David, he can't fight back right now. And there'd be a sword or a spear right through him. And yet, David doesn't. And he goes up and he cuts off a corner of his shirt here. A little different approach. David's like, I'm not going to kill him. I'm going to send him a message. David's thinking a little bit more long term here. Look what happens. Jump down to verse 7. It says, Saul left the cave and went his way. Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, my lord the king. When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. What do you think Saul's reaction was? When he walks out and realizes David was right there the whole time? First off, he's probably thinking more like, man, I could have walked 5 more steps and I might have been able to kill David. And then maybe it probably sets in like, wait a minute though. He's right there. Maybe he could have done this to me. Verse 9, it says, he said to Saul, why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay a hand on my Lord, because he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. See that there is nothing in my hand to indicate that I am guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. David understands something here. He could have taken action. He could have killed him. But David understands this principle. There's a difference in a moment and a memory. Think about this for a second here. Maybe you've been in a position to exact revenge on somebody. Maybe somebody's hurt you and you've gotten them back. Looking back at it, is that a story you're proud to tell? Is that a story that you, given the opportunity, would love to pass down to your grandkids or the next generation? Man, you should have seen it. You should have seen how I got him back. I got him back worse than he got me. Well, maybe you like to brag about that. I don't know. But I think that we have to understand when we're in the moment, sometimes we don't think straight. And looking back at a memory, maybe we've made that decision and regretted that. David says this in verse 12. He says, may the Lord judge between you and me. May the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me, but my hand will not touch you. Again, David understands that. He understands this battle is God's to fight, not his. And I think Saul appreciates that. Because you drop down to verse 20, and Saul replies to David this way, I know that you surely will be king, and the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. Saul gets it. David understands a principle that I think we would be wise to follow. He takes the high road, and he knows it's not easy, but he knows this. The high road is the long road, but the high road is the righteous road. The high road is letting God take care of a situation that we think we can take care of on our own. But we let God and we trust God to do it for us. And it seems like David and Saul are at peace here. And maybe they are for a stretch, but it doesn't seem to last very long, because you turn the page and go to chapter 26, and we see that Saul kind of is right back at it. Chapter 26 starts this way. The Ziphites went to Saul at Gibeah and said, "Is David not hiding on the hill of Hachilah, which faces Jeshimon?" I love reading the Old Testament because I love the names in the Old Testament. And what I love about saying them is most people can't pronounce them either, so they don't know if I'm wrong or not. Verse 2, so Saul went down to the desert of Ziph with his 3,000 select Israelite troops to search there for David. Saul is not only going back after David, but he's taking like his 3,000 elite soldiers with him. Not just soldiers, he's taking like the cream of the crop, like his black ops people. I mean, again, never underestimate how far your enemy might go, driven by their hatred of you or their dislike of you. Because, I mean, David at this point probably has like a dozen people with him. Saul's taking an army to find him and capture him. Verse 3 and 4, David finds out about it, and he sends some scouts, like David and his men are kind of up on the hill, and Saul and his men are down below. So they send some scouts down to check it out, and they come back and they tell him. In verse 5 and 6, David decides to go down there himself, and a guy named Abishai volunteers to go with him. And the story picks up again in verse 7 here. It says, David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there was Saul lying asleep inside the camp with his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Abner and the soldiers were laying around him. David's got another golden opportunity. I mean, his spear's right there. You go boom, boom, over. And look what Abishai says in verse 8. He says to David, "Today God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I won't strike him twice." Again, not only is it like boom, boom, David's got it out because Abishai's like, "I'll do it for you. I'll take care of your dirty work. This man deserves to die for what he's been doing to you. And here, God has given him to you." You're never going to guess what David does. Verse 9, but David says to Abishai, "Don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives," he said, "the Lord himself will strike him, or his time will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and the water jug that are near his head and let's go." So David took the spear and the water jug near Saul's head, and they left. No one saw or knew about it, nor did anyone wake up. They were all sleeping because the Lord put them into a deep sleep. And as the story goes on, they get a little further away from the camp. Saul wakes up, recognizes David's voice, and David's like, once again, "Hey, I could have killed you, but I didn't." Like basically he just keeps coming to him saying, "You've wronged me, you've hurt me, but I'm going to let God take care of it. I'm going to let God take care of it." I think this is so difficult for so many of us because God's timing and God's methods are so different than our own. Someone hurts you, you know exactly how you want either to get them back or for them to get theirs. But God, on the other hand, has a different strategy. And for us, it's hard to be patient with God. We have to trust him. We have to trust not only that he cares about us and that he hears us, but that he'll take care of a situation. And we want to do it ourselves. Because whatever I do with my own hands, I can see. I'm in control. I've got the wheel, so to speak. We have to let that go. One of the easiest ways to do that is to change our perspective. And I have to remind myself that nobody has ever committed any sin against me that they haven't committed against God first. Nobody's ever done a thing to me that hasn't been done to God already. No matter how bad somebody could hurt me, it's nothing compared to what they or what I myself have done to God. That helps me change my perspective. It helps me to humble myself in that moment and realize that that person who did that to me, that might be one of God's anointed, one of God's called. It's definitely one of God's children. Somebody who was created in his image like me. And it helps me change my perspective onto what maybe I've done to other people as well too. So what I'd like to do in the next couple minutes here as we kind of wrap this up a little bit is just come up with a couple of ideas, a couple of thoughts here to help maybe you in a similar situation. If you've been wronged and you feel like you want to kind of strike back and get that revenge, This will help you change your perspective on that. Here's the first thought. People respect you more for your suffering than they do your successes. What do you mean by that? Well, we love to see success, but we love a good rags to riches story too. You love to see somebody coming up out of nothing and becoming something. They mean they become filthy rich, but they become something. I've got students that came out of horrible situations, horrible home lives, and I look at them now, they're in their mid to late 20s, married, good job, kids. I'm proud of those kids. They worked hard. They didn't let their situation overcome them. I had students who grew up with parents who were doctors, and they are doing well too. They had a good foundation to start on. And I'm proud of them for what they've accomplished too, but it's just a different story to kind of see some of those who grew up out of a bad situation. We love to see that rags to riches. We don't always like to see the rich just continue to get rich. That's why we like March Madness so much, if you're a basketball fan. Okay? Most of us don't like to watch, Duke or North Carolina or Kentucky win it. I mean, Jay might. He's a Kentucky fan. Went to school there, but the rest of us don't care to see those schools win it, right? That's why you love to see like an Abilene Christian knock off somebody in the first round. You like to see one of those small schools like a George Mason go make the Final Four. You root for them even though you don't even know what stake they're in because they're a low seed knocking off the big boys. I think often when we see somebody that's just overly successful and everything comes easy and natural, there's almost a desire to be envious of what they have because they maybe haven't had to work as hard for it, and we have. But I think about it from this standpoint. When you come through a set of struggles, that doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean that it's you never have to complain about your struggles. You come through a set of struggles, that might be a testimony and a sermon to somebody that other people can't preach because it's personal for you. I often say that those who teach people and help reach people through addiction, that's a story I can't preach. That's a sermon I can't preach because that's not something I've had to go through myself. But maybe you have, and you can lead somebody to Christ through that. Through what you've gone through. Those struggles, those are going to refine you. Maybe you could say it this way, your story isn't about the crown you wear, it's about the cross you bear. It's about the cross that you have overcome. And often that cross can be put on us by other people. But just keep your eyes on God. Let Him take care of it. Proverbs 20 says this, don't say, I'll pay you back for this wrong. Wait for the Lord and He will avenge you. He'll avenge you. We've gotten into the Marvel movies. Elsie's into the Avengers movies right now. They've been around for a little while, but she's getting into them. And the whole point of those is they're Earth's mightiest heroes, here to avenge the earth, take care of the earth. And you've got God on your side doing the same thing. You've got God there to avenge you. Here's the second thought, kind of on these lines. Vengeance is righteous. Now you're like, Kurt, you've been sitting here saying that revenge is wrong for like the last 20 minutes. Now it's righteous. Yes. If you let God do it. Because again, there's a correlation between vengeance and justice. And God is a just God. Romans chapter 12, Paul writes this, do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, it is mine to avenge, and I will repay. In the Greek, the word here that's used for vengeance is the word ekdikasis. And this word is all about justice and making things right. It's very similar to another Greek word that we find elsewhere in the Bible, and it's this word, dikaiosune. Now, those don't necessarily look identical, but ekdikasis and dikaiosune mean kind of the same thing. They mean a right standing, a justice has been served, things have been made right. Ekdikasis is vengeance. You know how we translate dikaiosune? Righteousness. God's righteousness. And we think about this because I think sometimes maybe there's this idea of what does it mean to avenge or to get revenge, and those words sound similar. It depends on the perspective. To avenge is to seek retribution for someone else. To get revenge is to get retribution for yourself. God saying, I've got this. I'll take care of this. And I think the reason God says that is we aren't capable of doing this properly on our own. Like the way our brains are wired. The scientists have actually discovered this. The way our brains are wired, we can't accurately and honestly diagnose exactly how much pain we've endured. Our brains are wired to read it as if the pain we've endured is more than we actually have. So if somebody's done something to me, my brain automatically thinks I've been hurt worse than I actually have. So if I want to get even, guess what happens? I dole out the amount of pain to somebody else that I think I've endured myself. Except here's the problem. I've now doled out more pain to this person. And guess what their brain thinks? That they've been hurt worse than they just were. So if they come back at me a second time, it's worse. This is why things escalate. You hardly ever see something happen and then just an even return. It always escalates. Now sometimes this is lighthearted, like in a prank war, We prank each other. You want to one-up the next person. You kind of go back and forth and it one-ups. But when it comes to more serious matters, we do this. Somebody said something harmful or hurtful about you. What do? You take it another notch and say something about them. Ruin their credibility. Hurt them. Somebody takes something from you. You not necessarily take something from them, but you make sure that they lose what they took and then some. It's always an escalation with things. And it's because our brains can't quite understand this. But here's the good news. Here's my third thought on this. Here's the good news. There's a cure for revenge. The cure for the desire for revenge is just raw worship. It's just raw, completely, not to make this sound bad, you might even call it naked worship. And here's what I mean by that. It means you are allowing God to see everything. Okay? You're making yourself as vulnerable and intimate with Him as you can. Now, we worship God many ways. On Sunday morning, we come up here and we sing songs that praise Him and talk about how great He is and how wonderful He is and all the things He's done for us. How He's fixed our brokenness and how He's a good Father. And we sing those types of songs. And I love those types of songs because it focuses us on Him. And then we worship God through study together. We worship God through giving. We worship God through communion and through fellowship. There's so many different ways. But one way you can worship God is by being as intimate and vulnerable and naked before Him as you possibly can be. Bare your soul to Him. If you're angry, let Him know. If you're hurt, let Him know. If you wish something bad would happen to somebody else, let Him know. He can handle it. You may think, well, Kurt, I can't pray that God would hurt somebody. David did. And they're in the Bible. Have you ever read the book of Psalms? There are so many Psalms of David screaming out to God to take care of things. I mean, just look at this one, Psalm 58. Into our story here in 1 Samuel, as he's on the run from Saul, he prays this prayer, may they be like a slug that melts away as it moves along, like a stillborn child that never sees the sun. Taylor Swift's got nothing on that. Like, hers are pretty harsh. She's not asking that her ex-boyfriend be like a stillborn child. That's brutal. And you want to know something else? The early church would sing these. We sing, you're a good, good Father. They sing, make my enemies like a stillborn child. They prayed that to God because God understands our hearts and our brokenness because we're His creation. He understands that. Or Psalm 109, David, again, talking about Saul, he says, may his days be few. May another take his place of leadership. May his children be fatherless and his wife made a widow. May his children be wandering beggars. May they be driven from their ruined homes. In other words, hey, destroy everything in his life. David cries it out. David, the man after God's own heart, cries this out. Or later on in his life as he's running from his son Absalom, who's trying to kill him. Psalm chapter 3, it says, arise, Lord, deliver me, my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw, break the teeth of the wicked. If you want this sung next week, you can talk to Gretchen or Ole, and maybe we'll get up here and sing Break the Teeth of the Wicked next week. because they've done this. But here's what David knew, and here's what you can know today too. There is a safe place for you to get this out, and it's to God. Because God already knows what's on your heart. He already knows what's on your soul and on your mind. So verbalize this to him. Write this to him. David understood there's a safe place to vet this, and that's to God. And if you don't vent this in the safe place of worship and in the safe space of worship, where are you going to vent this instead? Where's it going to come out? Road rage? I mean, you're going to let this out through taking something from somebody? Through manipulating people? Through situations? Heaven forbid you take this out physically on another person? Spousal abuse? Child abuse? Worse? We have to know that God is a place we can drop this to. I always say, if you're angry at God, let him have it. He can handle it. He's a big God, and he's a good God, and he's a good Father who wants to protect his people. I get it. I've been wronged. I've been hurt. I've had people say things about me. I've had people say things about those I care about and love. Lies, slanders, people taking things from us. I get it. You have too. You've been in the same shoes. And man, there's so many times that in my life I look back and I'm like, I felt like I probably could have said this, and I didn't. And maybe I really wanted to, and I just didn't. And I just trust that God will take care of the situation. That he'll lead me through it, he'll heal me, and that he'll take care of the situation on the other end. Here's what we've got to be careful of, though. When you start to hurt somebody, even if they've hurt you, you realize a wounded animal, what their one immediate defense instincts is to lash and hurt other people. My dad used to tell me, if you see a wounded animal, don't try to help it because it's going to destroy you. See, like a cat or a dog that's been hit, they're going to scratch you and claw because they think you're coming to hurt them worse. Hurt people hurt people. So take a step back and break the cycle. Take a step back and take it to God. Because as a follower of Christ, as a believer in Jesus, revenge should not be something that is at the front of our mind. Psalm 37, David writes this, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun." If you're a follower of Jesus, your focus should never be on revenge or getting back at somebody else. It should always be on becoming more like Christ. So here's a takeaway for you today to kind of wrap this up and put a bow on it. To be a man after God's own heart requires you to give up your right for revenge. Focus on God. Focus on Jesus. God will take care of you, and that he may not break the teeth of your enemies. He may not make them like a slug that shrivels up and goes away. But he'll handle his situation with his plan, because that's what a good father does. Let's pray. Father, we are so thankful that you are indeed a good, good Father. We're so thankful, Lord, that you fight our battles for us. God, that you go before us. Lord, that you prepare a table for us in the presence of our enemies. God, so that not that we can be glorified, but that you can. God, I know it sounds silly to say sometimes, but we're grateful for those struggles or trials that we go through because they show us more about who you are in the end. So God, I pray today what anybody is struggling and dealing with hurt or pain, anybody who's struggling or dealing with these types of issues today, Lord, you would speak to their heart and to their soul and reassure them that you've got it. You've got it. God, and that we could begin to release those pains and those hurts to you, those frustrations to you, knowing, God, that you sent your son to die on the cross for us. And God, that anything we have done against you was released in that moment, that your wrath was released in that moment. God, we're so thankful for the cross of Jesus. We pray today in his name. Amen.